Hi, I'm State Representative Valerie Gaydos, serving the 44th District of Pennsylvania, which includes Moon Township, Pittsburgh Airport area. Recently, I introduced a bill to scale back our state government in an efficient, effective, and responsible way by reducing the size of the state legislature. With me today is Representative Jerry Knowles of Pennsylvania's 124th District from Schuylkill, Berks, and Carbon counties on the eastern part of the state. Representative Knowles has been a longtime advocate for shrinking the state government, and I'm pleased to welcome him here as we discuss the history of this legislation, the benefits of reducing the size of the legislature, and what it would mean to everyday Pennsylvanians. So welcome, Jerry. I really appreciate you taking the time to work with me as a new state legislator to sort of pass the baton on getting this issue moving forward.
Valerie, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm so happy that you've agreed. You came to me and we talked, and you had offered your support, and I indicated to you that I thought it might be better if you might take over and run with the bill as the prime sponsor. I appreciate that. You've got a lot of work ahead of you.
Thank you.
But I look forward to working with you.
Well, I think it's great to have someone with your experience in having done this, because what has been the process? A little bit of history I think would be really helpful to not only me but also to our constituents to know what it takes to actually get this piece of legislation, which is a constitutional amendment. It's not as simple as just passing a bill. So tell me a little bit about what the history has been and your experience in that. Well,
the history has been that it has to, as a constitutional amendment, it's got to pass in two consecutive sessions, and it has to be identical legislation. So it's a long, I think what I said was during my floor remarks, that it's a long and winding road. I believe that was the Beatles back in the 70s. But initially the bill was introduced.
What year was that?
That was in 2015. That's when the process started. At the time, there were 48 people who signed on as co-sponsors, very enthusiastically signed on. And the process from that point was it had to pass through the House, and then it was sent over to the Senate, and it had to pass in the Senate. But as you can imagine, nothing around here goes smoothly.
So I'm finding that out.
Yeah. So it goes back and forth. And then after it's passed by the House and the Senate, it has been, we're on our way. But then again, in the next consecutive session, and
that would have been the 2017-2018
yes, that's
session.
Correct. That's correct. But the thing is, it's kind of funny because initially, and by the way, before I became the prime sponsor, this bill's prime sponsor was Speaker Sam Smith. So it goes before I got involved. It goes because I think Sam may have run with it. Never got as far along as we did or I did.
Well, I think that it's something like this, particularly a constitutional amendment, where you have to pass two legislative sessions consecutively before it even goes to referendum.
Yep. And then there are requirements. After it passes, that it has to be advertised in the media. I think it's one newspaper in every county, and there's a process that has to be followed there. Then you go through the next session. And you know what, Valerie, that's when it gets more difficult, because that's when people realize that, this might happen. And it's amazing.
It's interesting because in studying all this, you and I had a lot of conversations, but I put a chart together where I looked at who voted for the bill when it was introduced, who co-sponsored it, who voted for it, and then who co-sponsored it the second time, and who voted for it or who didn't, and kind of did a comparison, saw people change their votes. I also saw a number of members who are no longer here, so you can't kind of go back and say, hey, wait, you voted for it before, now are you going to vote for it again? So I see that the process is complicated, but it really enables me to look at who in this session, or who we have now in this two-year legislative session, are the same people, and I'd like to try to get them on board and to not only co-sponsor the bill, but also vote for it. So let's talk a little bit about what is the benefit of reducing the size of the legislature, because
Well-
we've heard a lot of pros and cons, but I'd like to hear from you what your experience is.
Well, I've heard it all. Interestingly enough, there are some savings. There are some savings.
It's almost what, 15
about 15 million.
15
Yeah.
million a year.
Yeah, which is a lot of money, but some of the arguments that I heard that in the big scheme of things, when we're talking about $32 billion budgets, it's not a lot, but it's a lot of money where you and I come from.
But you know what? All of us have to tighten our belt, and it begins with a lot of these smaller things, so to speak, that we can cut our costs. That cup of coffee that you have every day and go to the store and buy, maybe that adds up after a while. So I think all these things that we can chip away that might not affect a lot of people, but could actually result in huge savings. And that's something that when I got elected, that I have stressed: fiscal accountability, savings, just being prudent in the decisions that we make every day.
Valerie, it comes down to leading by example.
Leading by example.
We talked to everybody else about how they should tighten their belts, and I mean there was a savings of around $15 million a year, but just as importantly, the fact that, and you've got to be careful how you say this, but as you know, we've got 203 members, and it is much more difficult to build consensus when you're dealing with 203 people. I got that right?
No, so there's 203 seats,
Yeah.
and I know people have said to me that, well, but if there's fewer seats, then that means more constituents per seat, and your state representative won't be able to reach out to folks. But keep in mind that 203 members, that has been for a very long time, and we now have new technology. We can reach out to our constituents much faster, better than we ever have been before. So I think using technology to our advantage can help us save money. But with 203 seats, like you said, it is really difficult to get consensus, particularly when the bills move so quickly. It's one thing to talk to a number of your colleagues when a piece of legislation is before us, but to talk to 203, it's almost impossible to get everybody on the same page.
Yeah, and really, we can talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, the good, if we want to talk about the good is that we reduce the size of government. We go from 203 to 151. And I got to tell you a quick story, because I find this rather humorous. When it had gone through committee, a state government committee, it was House Bill 153, because it was supposed to go from 203 to 153. But what happened was, we had realized that during the Constitutional Convention back in the 60s, the goal that they had set was that there were going to be 203 House seats in the Commonwealth. Now, bear in mind that back in those days, we didn't have the computers, we didn't have the technology that we do today. So this is a story that was told by someone that was involved in that process. And basically what happened was, they were drawing up the districts, they were setting everything up. It was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and they counted, and it wasn't 201, it was 203. So they said, hell, I'm tired, we're going to bed. So that's how it got to be 203. So Representative Metcalf in committee thought that it would be an opportunity to correct that mistake. It was supposed to be 201, so we can get it down to 151. So in committee, the chairman in the first session, he put an amendment in, and that was fine with me. Because people have people have talked about where did we ever come up with the number, and we can talk about that a little later. I don't want to cut you off here.
So access to your state legislator, if you have 203 or you have 151 versus 203, the question that comes up is, well, but if we have fewer legislators, does that mean that they will be influenced? It'll be easier for people who are of high influence to influence them. My view of this is that it makes it more accessible to the average person to be influential, Whereas with 203, the average person cannot be influential because you as a constituent or people as constituents have to get to 203 members, whereas it is much more efficient for the average person to be able to contact their legislator and actually make a difference.
And one of the things that I'll tell you, Valerie, is at no time was I thinking that, well, I said in different interviews, I don't want another Senate here. You know,
And what do you mean by that?
well, I think that there's 50 senators, and some of the games that were played during this whole process were they wanted to reduce the Senate from like 50 to 37, 38, and I quite frankly,
And they meaning other House members?
oh yeah, there were all kinds of shenanigans that were pulled, and I quite frankly said, I'm not looking to create another Senate. I'm okay with 50 senators. You know, they represent about 250,000 people. I'm okay with that. You know, the bill, we represent somewhere between 62 and 65,000. I think the bill would have taken it up to like 83,000.
It goes up to 80
Yeah.
some thousand, which we are the second highest number of legislators in the nation. And we are in session all year round, which also adds to those expenses. When you look at the number of constituents represented per legislator in other states, it is anywhere between 80 and 100,000. Some of them are a little bit higher, a couple of them are a little bit lower, but they also compensate by only meeting either 6 months out of the year or every other year. So you almost can't compare apples to apples, oranges to oranges here, but we can look and say the number one issue with us here in Pennsylvania is that we have the highest paid legislature, second highest paid legislature in the nation. We have other per diems, benefits, et cetera. Not that I would say that people don't deserve to get paid to do a job here, but when you combine all of these together, it's probably, you know, there's some handsome compensation. Although we do work long hours, this is something that could actually bring, in my opinion, bring the power back to the people.
Valerie, you mentioned something. We are the second largest legislature in the United States. We are the first the largest full-time legislature.
So we're largest and full-time, yeah.
Well, I think we're second largest. Oh gosh,
Somewhere around. I think that's correct.
Yeah.
But when you combine both being the second largest and the full-time, it really does add up expenses for the Commonwealth.
And the question that I was asked, and I started to go there before, you know, people said, well, where did you come up with the number? And I have a Pennsylvania population around 12.8. I think we may be over 13 million now. We would be going to 151. You would represent 84,000 people. Illinois is a good state to use as a comparison. They're around 12.8 million. They have 118 House members. They represent 109,000 people. New York, they've got about 19.8 million. They have 150 reps. They represent somewhere around 129,000. Michigan, a little shy of 10 million. They have 110 state reps, and they have, I think like they represent 90,000 people. And lastly, the state of Texas. You know, they've got close to 28 million people. They have 150 reps, and they represent around 168,000 people. So we are going to that number 151 is very reasonable, and there's many ways that you can substantiate the reason to go there.
So we've talked about the history. Now, going forward, you and I have talked about this, that we teamed up. I want to take the baton. I've introduced the legislation that has been introduced, and it's Senate Bill, or excuse me, it's House Bill 2151.
Right.
And so that has been introduced, and what's the process going forward, and where can people, constituents, help in sort of pushing this issue and pushing it with their state legislator, not just us? I mean, we know we're champions.
And I will say to you, Valerie, that your challenge is going to be even more difficult than mine. I will tell you that, you know, when you put 2 sessions or 4 years into something, and when you get, no one has ever got, we got 1 vote away And then there was some tactics that were pulled in committee, and you know how that stuff works around here. That somebody playing
put
games,
an amendment in, and then it had to go
yeah,
back for
yeah,
concurrence,
and they blew it up, and that's what some of them, because some of them, there's a lot of good people around here. We're very fortunate to represent the people that we do. There's a lot of good people, but sometimes people like to play games.
But that doesn't mean we're not going to try.
Oh, no, you're good. But
that's the thing is
exactly.
we need to keep this out in the open
Right.
to let people know that there are people fighting for it. And there are a number of folks who have signed on this piece of legislation.
Mm-hmm.
So we just need to make sure that any of those individuals who are coming into the legislature, that the general public is pushing their legislator to say, hey, look, we elected you, but we elected you to represent us and reduce that size of the legislature.
Valerie, what I would say, and I tell people this all the time, when people would come up to me and they said that they supported House Bill 153, I would say, well, where do you live? And they say, well, I live out around Pittsburgh. And your district number, forgive me.
It's 44?
So they said, yeah, I'm out around Pittsburgh. Who's your state rep?
Well,
Valerie Gaydos. And I say, let me tell you something. You're going to have a lot more influence over Valerie Gaydos than I am. So what you need to do, you need to call Valerie, and you need to tell her that you believe this is good legislation, and ask her or him to sign on, because that's how this is going to happen. And I said it's going to be more difficult, because I think every time you try something difficult, it becomes more difficult. On the other hand, there are some new faces around here.
We have a lot of new faces.
And there are people who I will tell you were very helpful and very supportive of me through this process. I had good people helping me.
Well, I'm very optimistic, because I think that my freshman class, if you will, the class of legislators who came in on both the Democrat and the Republican side, seem to have a number of years of experience in the private sector or doing a number of jobs that give them a life experience. And I'm really optimistic that they are really coming in here to fight for their constituents. So,
what you're going to hear, Valerie, I can tell you what you're going to hear. I've heard it all. Interestingly enough, you are going to hear that, oh, there's no way that I can represent 80-some thousand people. And my response to that was, listen, we've got, we've got iPhones, iPads, we've got all these devices.
Agree.
We've got social media. We've got a system in place. It's much easier for people to contact you than it was 20 or 30 years ago.
It sure is.
It's much easier.
The other argument that was said to me is that, well, then you'll be pitting, let's say if you do consolidate, and by the way, this legislation would take place in 2030. So it would be the 2030 census. That means that's 10 years from here.
Valerie, that might make it easier for you. You know why?
Why?
Well, because, the argument was mine would have taken effect after the census. Well, now...
That is the one thing that we did differently, so that when people said, well, they didn't want to eliminate their own seat.
Exactly.
Well, now it's 10 years down the road.
Yeah.
How about consolidate? But the other question was that if we do consolidate after the 2030, and let's say this passes, that they said it would pit legislator against legislator. And I said, bring it on, because if I'm doing a good job, that actually gives constituents the opportunity to match legislators head to head and say, hey, who's done the better job when given the same sort of opportunity in the seat? So I say go for it.
One of the most humorous incidents that I saw was in a committee meeting. I had a member who represents the rural areas, and he said, this is going to hurt rural Pennsylvania. Shortly thereafter, at that same hearing, there was a city legislator who sat up and said, I can't vote for this. This is bad for the city of Philadelphia. So I thought, it's proportionately, the districts will be reduced. I mean, they make it sound like one or the other.
Exactly, proportionally. And in fact, one of the other arguments that was said to me that it would reduce the opportunities for women and minorities. I don't see how that's possible. When you consolidate districts, if anything, you will consolidate and have greater consensus, whether it be women or minorities, because you'll have a higher number of folks voting. So, yeah, I've heard all sorts of arguments. And the other one is the person who introduces it, there will be the first seat that's eliminated. Well, you know what? People elected me to do my job, and if doing my job gets me unelected, I guess that's that's what they elected me to do.
Valerie, I will tell you that I had one member, and no names, but I had one member who came to me and by the way, they're not here anymore. But anyway, he came to me. They came to me and they said, "So, are you really going to run? Are you really going to go with this thing?" And I looked at the co-sponsorship memo and I said, "You're a co-sponsor." And they said, "Yeah, but I never really thought it would get this far." So that's the kind of games that you're dealing with.
Right.
And we need to hold people's feet to the fire.
We need to hold them to the fire. You're absolutely right. And people think that if somebody co-sponsors something that they are definitely committed to it. But it's like anything else, actions are greater than words. I want to see them advocating for it.
Let me tell you the most important element, and you got to remember this, because we have a tendency to get involved in the stuff that we're talking about here, okay? Let me tell you something that we got to remember. This is it's an amendment to the Constitution. So guess who gets to make the final decision? The people of Pennsylvania. So basically, when I was selling this bill, I said, look, let's give the people of Pennsylvania the chance to decide whether we should be at 203 or 151. People deserve the right to make the decision. And that's been my sell all along. And they said, well, they're going to want to make it smaller. Well, I said, maybe that's the answer to your question. But I said, realize that from the time when it finally passes, this is not signed by the governor. The governor has nothing to do with this. You will have an opportunity during that period of time, both sides of the issue, those who believe we should stay at 203 and those who believe that we should go to 151, you will have an opportunity to make your sales pitch to the voters of Pennsylvania, and then they get to make the decision.
So Jerry, what is that opportunity, and how do we take the opportunity that we have right now and move and advance the ball on this?
Well, the opportunity, we need to remember that this is a difficult task, but I know that you are the lady that can do it. It's tough. I mean, we need to continue to educate our colleagues
and constituents.
Oh yeah, but even our colleagues. It's amazing when I would sit down and talk to people, and they were on they were kind of. And I would explain to them why this is good for Pennsylvania. I would explain to them that the voters get to make the choice.
The voter gets to make the choice.
Yeah, and there were some of them who came over and who eventually ended up voting. If you remember, Valerie, I know you don't remember. I guess you weren't here. But this was a back and forth. It was very, very grueling and challenging, and I look forward to it. I look forward to doing it all over again. But we do. I've already seen you working the floor. I've already seen you approaching members, asking them if they're going to sign back on. And I think we continue to build our co-sponsorship memo. We need to certainly be constantly in contact with leadership, letting them know how important this is to us, encouraging the leaders to don't forget we're here and we're not going away.
That's right. We're not going away, and I think that there are a number of other legislators who feel the same way. And as you said, we're talking to our colleagues. We are getting the number of co-sponsors. We're talking to leadership, and it's one day at a time. But we're going to keep this in the news, and we're going to make sure that we work our colleagues. But I absolutely appreciate the work you have done, the history. It's been very helpful to me, and it's been an absolute honor to work with you and team with you in order to do this.
Valerie, when you think about this process, I mean, our ancestors were so brilliant. I mean, I had an old timer that one time I said to him when I was county commissioner that we need to run government more like a business. And he said to me, I won't tell you the expletives, but it was like, how can you be so dumb? Government is not supposed to be run like a business. There are checks and balances, and listen, think about it, Valerie.
The checks and balances should be run like a business.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
we all know that government does take care of the people, but we need to have the combination of both government and the business aspect of things in order to make sure that we're using tax dollars wisely.
But to pass a bill, not easy. I mean, there are thousands of bills that are introduced in the Senate and the House, and how many of them really become law? They didn't want to make it easy. They wanted to make it tough. When you go through the process and you go from the House to the Senate and you make changes and you have concurrence, when you're doing a change to the Constitution, it is tough. It is a challenge. That's not by mistake. They wanted it to be tough. They thought they had a good product. They wanted it to be tough.
Yeah, well, that's I certainly encourage people to read the Constitution, know that both the Pennsylvania Constitution and the U.S. Constitution, but I absolutely agree that our founding fathers were brilliant. So I don't mind fighting this fight because I think that with 203 members, we represent people, but I think we can do it much more efficiently. And I'm pleased to champion this issue and take your baton and move it forward.
Well, anything that I could do to work with you, I'd be more than happy to. I would like nothing more than to see the voters of Pennsylvania get the opportunity to make this choice.
Well, I've been keeping a list of those who have, as I said, I've put a chart together, those who have sponsored it, those who have voted for it, those who have voted for it twice, and of course, we've got a number of new members, so we've got to approach them, talk to them, and I think that's the process going forward. I'm certainly honored to be working with you on this and appreciate all your history, your background. I think this has been really helpful to me, and I look forward to representing the people of of not only my 44th district, but also of the state of Pennsylvania. I think that the history behind this is absolutely fascinating, and I certainly encourage a number of individuals to understand the Constitution. So thanks to Representative Jerry Knowles for joining me today on this very special edition of the Gaydos Report. For constituents, if you'd like to know more about this legislation, the Pennsylvania Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, I invite you to visit my website, representativegaydos.com, and to follow me on social media for updates on all my legislative priorities. Thank you for watching.
Join Representative Gaydos for her upcoming events in the 44th District, including a telephone town hall on Tuesday, February 27th at 7 p.m. You can register online at repgaydos.com. Healthy Kids and Family Resources Day on Saturday, April 25th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Sewickley YMCA at 625 Blackburn Road in Sewickley. Identity Theft Prevention and Shredding event on Saturday, June 13th from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. at Moon Middle School at 904 Beaver Grade Road in Moon Township. And her Senior Citizen Wellness Program on Friday, October 23rd from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the Pittsburgh Sheraton Hotel at 1160 Thorn Run Road in Moon Township. For further information, visit Representative Gaydos' website or call her district office at the number on your screen.